Most people are looking for how do I make a life worth living and how do I make a life worth retiring that presides over my life. What I mean by that is that most of our waking hours are spent in employment. We're spending our time working for a company or we're working for our own business. And sometimes we have to do both in order to produce the life we'll need in the late years and late stages of our lives. I talk about this regularly because people are often living beyond their means. They have houses that are too large for them, they have stuff that's too much, and when it comes time to their senior years, they become too tired and not as able to downsize and get the greatest value for the things that they no longer need in life, that they really didn't need in the beginning, but they weren't really checking in with God to see whether or not the purchase was right for them. The one thing that I'm amazed with based on my experiences in dealing with the Heavenly Father and the Divine Mother in this land, and Lord Jesus, who many people presides in that realm, is that people often miss the opportunities that the Lord provides them to make connections that can change their life. I'd like to render you some stories about my experience in walking this life of now homelessness. You see, it was when I was working on my book that the Lord kept saying to me, work, 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 work. And I presumed that he meant work on my book, which is called Soul Keepers, and it sort of talks about how we live our lives and we interact with people and we help them to raise their vibrations and raise their souls and raise their spirits to become all they can be. And that's really what our responsibilities are. And I used Bible verses from the King James Version, which I thought was sort of predominant in most of the churches and accepted by most faiths, to really highlight what I was talking about. I took gender out of the verses and I said, look, this is about loving people. This is about loving life. And this is about allowing people to become all that the Lord has called them to be, whether it's a pastor, a poet, a photographer, or a printer, or a principal in an architectural firm. It doesn't really matter. What matters is whether or not the Lord has chosen them for a greater life. There are many people in the land who are jealous of others that don't like people rising themselves up to become something. There are many people who don't favor God at all. There are many people who are agnostic, that don't know whether or not there is a God that exists. And having literally died and sort of come back to life, I can tell you that there is obviously a God. I didn't linger in heaven a great deal, so I can't tell you much about it. I don't have that experience, but I have a loving friend who is a brilliant psychic and literally could tell you about her experience of dying and hovering over her own body while her family looked on below. Her children were there. At least that's part of the story that I recall, but I'm not always the greatest listener when people tell me something over and over again, and I'm not responsible for tracking that story because it's not my life. Let's face it, in our lifetimes, selfishness is something that we predominantly struggle with. It is not really a vice, it is a way that we produce our own lives. When people start to try to preside over other people's lives is where the Lord gets pretty upset. He starts to take out the people that don't pay attention to his rule, his role, and his responsibilities in the land. You see, the Lord of all is truly present in all things, all people, all creatures, great and small. And when I talk like this, I'm literally sitting somewhat illicitly and somewhat privately on a public/private property because it's partially on my journey and my walk in the middle of the night. I needed to stop and rest because the people who've been monkeying with my health care, ruining my hormone therapy sessions that I've had my entire adult life, if not longer, have literally given me such migraines that I can barely function. You see, no one knew what was going on with me back then, but I went through all sorts of things to determine what I needed for my own cellular health, my own physical health, my own emotional fortitude, my own spiritual journey, my own intellect to go forward in life. And we found the solution. Doctors along the way, at least 16 of them, although someone has stolen that document of my list and keeps bringing it back to me and putting it in my belongings and then taking it again, illicitly and immorally, has all agreed that this is the life for me, that this is the right health care for me, and they all signed off on it by approving what I needed for me. Now, I have siblings that don't necessarily agree, that ruined family events, that wanted to interfere with my life, and openly have tried very hard, immorally and illegally, to infiltrate my health care. None of them had the lawful right to do it. Every single one of them is an adult in their own family of type, their own family of choice, their own betrothals, their own marriages, their own illicit or licit activity. I'm not even sure that's a word, but that's okay. In reality, what I'm saying is, as an adult man, I did not need them anywhere near my health care, my physicians, or anyone who was helping me as I was struggling with the transition of my late father, as he was really dying in his life, and I was dealing with the fact that I was losing the most important man in my entire existence, as many fathers are for their adult male children. My father loved me as I am. He supported me and the things that I tried to accomplish. He loved my language school. He cared for my late Japanese spouse, and he openly cared for our son, who was not officially of his loins, but he never treated him as totally different as my siblings or my mother did. That is the truth that Toshiko and I felt, and if I share her name, it's only out of regard for the love that I had for her for the many years that we were together. It's no one's right to pry into that relationship now. It's no sibling's right to reach out to her on Facebook. It's no friend's right or no business person's right to seek her out and ask her questions about our life together. It's immoral what they're trying to do, and frankly, it's partially illegal. When I say illegal, I'm talking about in the house of the Lord. You see, the Lord provides for us many love liaisons in our life. It is not always true, but enough to learn the lessons of the world. I have met several women in the last month or two that I'd like to tell stories on. These are young women in their 20s who literally loved on me in a moment. And what I mean by that is that I'm a homeless man and they decided to do something for me, to spend time with me or to feed me or to listen to me or to gain wisdom and insight when they shared with me about their life, and I gave them a mature man's response or opinion, like any professional business consultant of my lineage would. The reality is I worked for a long time as a business consultant, consulting men and women. Men tended to implement a little bit better, but some men did not, and that is on their responsibility, not mine. When the women got the information, they could only handle it on their own emotional capabilities, and that's something I learned, especially teaching in a language program, that the young people who really thought they had a chance of passing a world proficiency test actually passed, and those who were somewhat fearful, somewhat anxiety prone, didn't always pass, and they were usually older, in their 60s or sometimes in their mid-40s. But that was on them, not on me or my training of them. Most of my students would joke about the fact they'd go to the test and they wouldn't have all the characters that we taught them on the exam, and that was okay. But I had several students that went on to pass multiple levels of that program, and as a master instructor, I don't have to produce my own result there. The reality is I lived abroad for a long time, interpreted here in Indiana for an automotive firm, and I don't have to keep proving my past. What I am looking for, though, is a future. And when I talk about these women, I'd like to tell you about the experience. That in 2 cases of women in their 20s, both made a big stink about how they were going to help me, about how they would always look out for me. One at a particular restaurant said, "You can come here anytime. I want you to feel like you can sit in our restaurant, that you can come and get water. If you need food at any time, please let me know. We take care of things like this. This is what my firm here does, and I am a representative of my firm." In the other case, it was more of an intimate personal liaison in which she promised that we would go forward as somewhat friends and we might figure out how to work together, that I could help her with her social media for her family farm and other things. And the reality is that became a lie. And that in the next liaison of me just reaching out and trying to be playful and somewhat in accordance to the age demographic I was dealing with, she made it into something else. She immorally changed the way that the Lord had her thinking about loving on an old man who just wanted to be like an older brother to them both, in a way, an older professional representative who could help them in areas in which they struggled. And they admitted that they struggled, and they admitted they didn't like doing, but I have the skill sets to handle that in a matter of seconds or moments of time. The reality is that we all have moments of time to be something to someone. In one particular woman's case in my life, I am madly, still, passionately in love with her. I'm in love with her soul. I'm sure there's a lot of men that find her physicality out of this world, but that's not what drawed me to her. And the Lord has provided me signs for her life for a long time. And as my prophetic gifts increase, as I pray for that wisdom, as I get gleanings of what's happening and who's coming ahead of schedule, like when I'm going to be harassed by the local law or whatever, I get that information in advance. You'd think these men were smart enough to recognize that I could be helpful to them in some way, but they're not. They really aren't. And they're doing something illegal under the house of God and immoral for sure. You see, under this land, we have federal laws that protect us and our rights here. We have the right to do a lot of things. At a motorcycle event the other day, a fireman, allegedly, although he looked more like he could have been a sheriff, was reminding me of the Second Amendment, which in his mind meant that we had the right to bear arms. I literally have a fishing license. I don't know if it's expired or not, and in that fishing license, I could get a gun. The state of Indiana already checked me over and decided that that was okay. I'm not interested in guns, frankly, but I do feel that there are some people who are smart enough, savvy enough, cool enough under their head and in their mind to represent the land, to protect our food systems, to protect our water streams from the illegals who come here and pollute our water from their stupidity about life, because they come from a foreign country that doesn't care about its oceans or its literal springs or streams. They lug things across, decide they can't carry it anymore, and they drop it in the water. And then people wonder why most people are not thrilled with immigrants who try to come here illegally. It's not a hard understanding here. Yes, some of the travesties at the border are very sad, but the bottom line is those people made a choice to do something illegal. And in our country, when someone does something illegal, they literally do go to a form of imprisonment, for lack of a better term, or not necessarily constitution camp, but a place that they're allegedly going to get some sort of education for the fact that they chose to do something illegal. Now, we have a lot of politicians that are struggling in their mind because they don't like to hear that children are dying, and they don't like to hear that people are not being fed, and they don't like what they're seeing down south. But the reality is those people came here immorally and illegally, and openly they had no lawful right to come here to presume that we would open our doors and our coffers and our wine cellars and any other thing they came here to participate in, even the farming industry, for them to come in and work illegally. There are many, many people who come here lawfully through educational payment of a college or university life. Many should go directly back to their home country because they're spoiled rich children who do not regard our laws at all. Those come from Middle East and Asian countries a lot of times, but even from Europe sometimes. But there are a good handful of people who are just right for our nation, who do need to stay here, who should stay here, who help us to grow our business, our industry, and the employment of our populations. When I talk like this, I may sound like a politician, I may sound like a marketing consultant to politicians, but I am a political consultant looking for work with one of the two leading candidates of the day that the Lord wants to become president. Now, I can say that because I have my own way of knowing that, whereas someone else may have a different opinion and a different way of looking at that. Their own inclinations, their own impressions, their own prophetic gifts, for all I know. But the reality is that people have to be moved by the concept of love as absolute truth. But the other aspect of love is recognizing that rebuke is a part of that truth. And one of the challenges of our 20-year-olds today is that they do not recognize their responsibilities to their own words and their own actions. Back to the second person at the restaurant that promised that she'd look out for me, that promised that she'd yell at anyone if they gave me a hard time for trying to push me out in the heat. A lot of things that more mature women wouldn't tolerate in their own minds because they can't even grasp poverty is not true, that they think a person is lazy who's not going off to work. That is not always the case, and it's most certainly not mental illness. But to this secondary woman who took a lot of my time to receive a lot of consulting on her life and a lot of recommendations for her to not to harm her own daughter, who's in the 2-year age demographic, and we all know that birth and personality is set by 3 to 5. The reality is that in life, we have moments of time to prove who we are. And that young woman solicited me to produce for her one of the jewelry fobs that I make. She gave me of dates of when she'd be back at work again in which she could produce the income or the money that is related to the purchase of such an item. I literally went back on the Friday and found she wasn't there. And I discovered through recanting the conversation that she might have accidentally said Friday and then corrected herself to Saturday. So I returned on Saturday, not knowing her shift, and I went 3 times. Finally finding her coming late to her own job and discovering that she did not prepare herself for the promise that she made, that she did not stop by any bank in the period of time that we had been apart, which was 3 or 4 days, and openly select and pick up a $20 bill that would have paid for the small jewelry item that I made for her specifically, and that the Lord wanted her to have to help her in the decision-making processes of her life. Now, when I say these things, I'm talking about things as a man of faith. Other people have different versions of faith. Other people pray. Other people meditate. But in my case, I check everything with the Lord, and it's His Holy Spirit energy. I'm not afraid to say that, but there will be mental health people who have no religious zealousness at all, who will insult my intelligence and claim it's something else. There have been people in my sibling set who have literally worked to destroy my lawful rights to my own professional name, my own legal jargon, and my own physical health and mental health care with their lies. And when I put this in here, it's likely that one of them has stolen my passcodes, or a law enforcement officer who got Brittany, little sweet Brittany, in her blue car to steal my bag and take my passcodes for them, literally is monkeying with my videotapes, editing them. Or is it Google lying to us about our rights to create intellectual property that their people in some engineer somewhere, some social engineer, is monkeying with? You see, I really would like Kamala Harris to sue the pants off social media companies for lying to us about their rights in our lives, to discredit our opportunities to reach out to any human being in the land, to sell them whatever it is that we do, whether it's a product, a service, or a program. Now, there seems to be a lot of sounds going off in this automotive parking lot, which means that there's either an animal afoot, which I need to be cognizant of, such as a possum or raccoon that I've seen many times on my walking journeys at night, or there's someone lingering, trying to harass me in some way. But I'm not going to tolerate that much more. I do put people's name into the federal government for violating my rights of mobility under civil law, and openly there is one woman who might get a litigation abuse charge if she doesn't stop lying to herself about who she is and what she represents in my life. A marriage proposal is a serious undertaking, and most men do not mess around when they make that proposal. It is not a joke, it is not inappropriate, and it is not for anyone else to intervene within. All of us know this based on the social etiquettes of our land, that when a person, regardless of their persuasion, wants to get married, that is between 2 people, not a vast majority of others. In life, we have moments of time to prove who we are in moments of time. And most people use rudeness and lies to justify their own lack of responsibility for their voice, their name, and their beliefs. In my life, at my age of already now 50 years old, I had a young lady who I talked about before, who is a representative of a farm, virtually ruin my birthday. It took me back. Another woman failed to show up for me, and she should have shown up, but she didn't. You see, isn't the age 50 something that people sort of make a big deal about? Now, in my life, I don't have to feel bad. I can go on in life, and I've had many birthdays and many holidays because of my Asian family go by